So what is a temporary guardianship designation? My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm an estate planning and business law attorney with offices in Edina, Minnesota and New York City. And today we're going to look at a document that you may or may not have in your estate plan, but if you don't have it, you want to consider whether it should be in there with your documents. So a temporary guardianship designation is usually a pretty short form that says if you're out of town or if you're away from your children, you're appointing somebody else to act as the guardian for them. So if you have children under the age of 18, this can be a very important form if, for example, you and your spouse are going to go on a trip somewhere without the kids, or maybe you and your spouse and one of the children is traveling to a sports tournament, or maybe you don't have a spouse and you need to go on a business trip or go on some other trip and leave your kids at home with somebody else. So the point of the temporary designation of guardianship form is that it can tell other people, service providers for your children, who is actually in charge for making decisions. So for example, you have a temporary guardianship designation form that can be used to show the school that grandma is the one making decisions, or if grandma has to take the children to a doctor, or if grandpa has to do something else with them where we need to sign off on a waiver or need some other legal document signed on behalf of the children. This temporary guardianship designation works very well and is often used by things like schools and doctors' offices to make sure they know who they're talking to. These have become more prevalent in the last 20 years or so, mainly because we've seen more and more people getting divorced, but we've also seen some pretty ugly custody situations. And because of these ugly custody situations, your doctor, your school, the people you're working with who provide services for your children, they want to make sure they're speaking to the right person and not somebody who shouldn't have that child and definitely should not be making major decisions for them. Especially if you're in something like a doctor's office and we have to make a call over whether we're going to do a medical procedure. The doctor wants to make sure they have the right person there, the right person who can make the decision, the right person who has the legal power to make the decision. This temporary designation of guardianship is very important in those situations. Now, many of my clients have thought that when it comes to a temporary guardianship designation, we're thinking about a long document, usually because we've worked on a will and a trust and some other healthcare documents, and they can be longer. But a temporary guardianship designation is often just a page or two long, and it's usually got 4 basic elements that we need to have in there. First of all, your information, meaning you, the parent, your information has to be in there. Number 2, your child's information, their name, their date of birth. Some states will require a social security number. Number 3, who is going to be the temporary guardian? So who are we choosing to make these decisions while you're gone? And number 4, how long the guardianship will last. So if you know you're going on a trip for a week, we want the temporary guardianship to start when you leave, and we want it to end when you get back. You don't want any decisions being made after you're back from your trip. Let's say, for example, you're dealing with a grandparent and you're not wild about some of the decisions they made while you were gone. They're not able to continue to make those decisions once you get back, so we want to make sure we have an end date to that designation of guardianship. So my clients who don't have a temporary designation of guardianship will ask me, what happens if I don't have one? Is it really a big deal? Or, what would happen if something happens to me on that trip? So let's look at the process that your family members would have to go through when it comes to a court. So without that temporary designation of guardianship, there's going to be a formal court process that somebody would have to go through to be appointed as a temporary guardian for your children. First thing they're going to have to do is file a petition or an application or some kind of a document with your local court to figure out who should be appointed as a temporary guardian. Now, the challenge here is, of course, how do you know which court to go to? If you're working with an attorney, they can definitely help you and make sure it's filed in the right court. But let's say something's happened to you on vacation, you're in the hospital, everyone's a little bit crazy, they're not sure what's going on, everyone's stressed out, and then now we're going to add on top of that somebody has to go to a court and figure out which court to go to. Once that petition or other document has been filed, there's normally going to be what we call an emergency hearing, meaning the court will set down a date and a time to have the proposed guardian come to the court and explain why they should be the temporary guardian. They would also normally make you give notice to other family members. So you'll have to look at your local court's guidelines as to who has to be notified. But if we have 4 living grandparents and we're trying to figure out which grandparent should be appointed guardian, you probably have to give notice to all the grandparents and have somebody decide who's going to be the guardian. And if you come up with some kind of a disagreement over that, then you could have a full formal court hearing trying to decide which grandma is going to take care of the children while you're in the hospital in the Bahamas. Third step, the court will appoint a temporary guardian. So the court's going to look through all the evidence, maybe have a hearing, and decide who's the most appropriate person to be granted temporary guardianship of your children. And then the fourth piece of this, as part of that appointment, the court's going to decide how long it will last. So again, if you're in a hospital and we're not sure when you're going to come out of the hospital and be able to come home, that temporary guardianship could last for quite some time. So one of the aspects of this that the court has to figure out is how long will that temporary guardianship designation, well, not designation, how long will that temporary guardianship appointment by the court last? So hopefully you can see from these 4 steps that it's a lot easier to do a 1 or 2 page temporary designation of guardianship form than it is to have your family go through a full guardianship proceeding with your local court. So if you're in the situation, whether you have an estate plan or not, you have children under 18, especially if you're going on a trip, let's make sure we create a temporary designation of guardianship for you and your family so we know who's in charge while you're gone. If you have more questions or you're ready to get started, you can go to my website, andrewmayers.com. There's a red legal strategy session button on the main page. Click that and you'll be taken to my personal scheduling page where we can set up a time, usually a 15 or 20-minute phone call, and we can talk about where you are in this process and what's needed to get a temporary guardianship designation form in place for you. If you like this video, I'd love it if you hit the thumbs up or the like button. You can share it. You can go over to the YouTube channel. But hopefully you can see from all of this, this isn't something you want to try to do yourself. We want to make sure that if we're doing a temporary designation of guardianship, we do it for children under 18 and we make sure it's done correctly.